Ethanol and turpentine have a distinct smell, a sharp chemical tang that usually signaled the quietest part of my day. For most people, Friday night meant crowded bars, bad decisions, and loud music. For me, it meant the silence of the basement conservation lab at the Chicago History Museum, the hum of the ventilation system, and the steady, rhythmic scrape of a scalpel against aged varnish. I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I preferred it. The dead were much better company than the living. They didn't lie. They didn't leave. And they certainly didn't look at you with pity when they learned your father had been swallowed by a federal penitentiary and never came back. I adjusted the magnification lamp, narrowing my eyes at the canvas beneath my hands. It was a mid-19th century portrait of a merchant, nothing particularly famous, donated anonymously 3 days ago. The donor had checked the box for tax write-off and vanished. But something about the texture of the paint near the merchant's left hand bothered me. The craquelure, the network of fine cracks that develops as paint ages, looked wrong. It was too uniform, almost manufactured. "Let's see what you're hiding," I whispered to the painted merchant. Dip, swab, roll. I worked the cotton swab over the area, lifting the yellowed varnish. Usually, this process revealed brighter colors, the true intent of the artist. Tonight, it revealed something that made my stomach drop straight to the linoleum floor. It wasn't pigment. It was black ink. Modern ink, sitting on top of the primer but beneath the fake aging layers. I switched to the UV light, the purple glow illuminating the canvas. The merchant's hand disappeared, replaced by rows of alphanumeric sequences. It wasn't just a retouch. It was a ledger. I recognized the format immediately. My father had been a forensic accountant before he was framed, and he'd taught me patterns before he taught me how to ride a bike. These weren't just numbers. They were shipping routes, dates, and account holdings. And at the bottom, stamped in a hue that only showed up under the ultraviolet spectrum, was a crest I knew from the terrified whispers of my father's old clients. A wolf holding a scales. The Giardoni family seal. My breath hitched, creating a small fog on the magnifying glass. This wasn't a donation. This was a drop. Someone was using the museum's intake system to move information right under the nose of the authorities, or worse, rival factions. And I was the idiot who had just cleaned it off. I reached for my phone to take a picture, my hand shaking slightly. I wasn't brave. I was a 26-year-old woman with student debt and a cat named Vermeer. I didn't do crime. I fixed old things. But before I could unlock the screen, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the loading bay upstairs. It wasn't the clumsy breakage of a janitor dropping a bottle. It was the deliberate, violent smash of a security door being breached. I froze. The museum security guard, old Mr. Henderson, did his rounds on the second floor at this hour. The basement was empty. Or it was supposed to be. Heavy boots thudded against the concrete stairs, descending fast. No stealth. No hesitation. Whoever was coming down here wasn't worried about being heard. They were here to destroy something. Check the intake room. Burn it all. A voice growled. It was deep, rough, and carried an accent I recognized from the news, the O'Sullivan faction. Irish mob. They weren't here for the art. They were here for the ledger I was staring at. And if they found me standing over it, they wouldn't just ask me to step aside. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to seize my legs, but I forced my brain to work. I couldn't run out the main exit. They were blocking the stairs. The freight elevator was too loud. The only way out was the emergency fire exit in the back of the lab, which led to the alley. But to get there, I had to cross the open room. "I smell chemicals," the voice shouted. Closer now. "It's in the lab." I looked at the canvas. If I left it, the evidence would burn. If I took the frame, it was too heavy to run with. I made a choice that made my professional soul scream. I took my scalpel, the blade fresh and razor sharp, and slashed the canvas along the inner edge of the stretcher bar. The tearing sound seemed deafening in the quiet lab. I ripped the painted linen free, rolling it haphazardly into a tight tube, cracking the paint I would usually spend months preserving. The door to the lab kicked open just as I shoved the rolled canvas into the deep inner pocket of my utility jacket. 3 men spilled in. They wore ski masks and dark tactical gear, carrying distinct red jerry cans. Accelerant. They weren't just going to burn the painting. They were going to torch the whole room to cover their tracks. One of them saw me. He raised a handgun without a second thought. Witness. I didn't wait to beg. I didn't wait to explain. I slammed my hand onto the big red button on the wall next to me. The halon fire suppression system. In a modern museum lab, water damages art. So we use gas. Halon displaces oxygen instantly. It sucks the air out of the room to starve a fire. It also starves people. A deafening hiss erupted from the ceiling nozzles as the gas deployed. The man fired, but the shot went wild, shattering a beaker of acetone near my head as the sudden pressure change and the white fog disoriented him. "Gas! Mask up!" he screamed, choking. They fumbled for equipment they hadn't expected to need. I didn't have a mask, but I knew the room. I held my breath, my lungs already burning, and sprinted through the blinding white chemical fog toward the rear exit. My shoulder clipped a metal shelving unit, sending trays of pigments crashing down. But the noise was swallowed by the hissing gas. I hit the crash bar of the emergency door with my full weight. It flew open, and I spilled out into the alleyway, gasping for air. The Chicago night air was freezing, a wet slap against my flushed skin. Rain poured down in sheets, instantly soaking my hair and clothes, mixing with the chemical residue on my skin. I coughed violently, my throat raw from the trace amounts of gas I'd inhaled. I scrambled up from the wet asphalt, clutching the jacket pocket where the canvas sat against my ribs. I needed to get to the main street. I needed a cop. I needed to disappear. I turned to run toward the street lamp at the end of the alley, but a pair of blinding headlights flared to life, pinning me against the brick wall of the museum. I threw my hands up to shield my eyes, my heart hammering against my sternum like a trapped bird. It was a black sedan, massive and sleek, idling with a low, predatory rumble. A Maybach. The rear door opened. A man stepped out. He didn't run. He didn't seem to care about the rain that was ruining what looked like a $5,000 Italian suit. He opened a large black umbrella, the motion smooth and controlled, and walked toward me. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with the kind of broad shoulders that made the suit fabric strain slightly. His hair was dark, cut short and severe, water already beating on the strands, but it was his face that stopped me from running. High cheekbones, a jawline that looked carved from granite, and eyes so dark they looked like voids under the harsh alley lights. He wasn't one of the men from inside. He wasn't wearing a mask. He didn't have a gas can. He stopped 3 feet from me. He looked at the open door behind me, where wisps of halon gas were still escaping into the rain, then looked back at me. He scanned my face, noting the fear, the scalpel I was still gripping in my right hand, and the protective way I held my left arm over my jacket pocket. "You have nimble hands, Ms. Mitchell," he said. His voice was a low baritone, calm, devoid of the chaos that was currently ruining my life. He knew my name. "Who are you?" I demanded, backing up until my spine hit the wet brick. I raised the scalpel. It was a laughable weapon against a man of his size, but it was all I had. "Someone who prefers his property unburnt," he replied. He nodded toward my pocket. "The painting, or what's left of it." "It's evidence," I snapped, the rain plastering my bangs to my forehead. "The O'Sullivans are inside. They have guns." "I know," he said, sounding bored. "My men are dealing with the O'Sullivans at the front entrance as we speak. But the O'Sullivans are blunt instruments. I was worried they would destroy the message before I could retrieve it. It seems you beat them to it." He took a step closer. The umbrella shielded me from the rain for a brief second, creating a strange, intimate, dry circle in the middle of the storm. "I'm Silvio Giardoni," he stated. The name landed like a physical blow. The Giardoni family. The people who supposedly orchestrated the fraud that sent my father to prison. The people who ran this city's underworld with a velvet glove and an iron fist. I should scream, I whispered. "You could," he agreed. "But the police are at least 6 minutes away. The men inside who didn't choke on your gas are likely finding their secondary exits right now. If you stay here, they will find you. And they don't leave loose ends." He extended a hand. It was large, the fingers long and calloused. a heavy signet ring on his pinky. "Get in the car." "I'm not getting in a car with a mob boss," I said, my voice shaking but my grip on the scalpel tightening. "I know who you are. I know what you do." "Then you know I don't ask twice," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Look, Chloe, you have something I need. You also have a target painted on your back the size of this building. You saw the code. You know what it is. That makes you a liability to the Irish. And a curiosity to me. I'll give you the canvas," I said, reaching for my pocket. "Just take it and let me go." He shook his head. "Not enough. You saw it. You interpreted it. I need to know what you know, and I need to know why you were the one to find it. And right now, I have a very pressing schedule." "Schedule?" I choked out a hysterical laugh. "I almost died in a chemical cloud and you have a schedule?" "My brother is getting married tomorrow morning," Silvio said, checking a watch that probably cost more than my student loans. "I need to be there. I need to look composed. I need to look like I am not currently fighting a territory war with the Irish. And I need a date." I stared at him. The absurdity of the statement almost short-circuited my brain. "You want me to be your date? I'm a restorer. I smell like turpentine and fear. You can't be serious." "I am always serious," he said. "You need protection. I can provide that. No one touches what is mine. If you walk into that wedding on my arm, the O'Sullivans won't touch you. It buys you immunity. It buys you time to figure out how to disappear, or for me to fix this mess." "And what do you get?" I asked, my eyes darting to the car. The warmth radiating from it was tempting. I was freezing, shivering violently now. "I get the canvas," he listed. "I get your silence. And I get a companion who looks intelligent enough not to ask stupid questions in front of the press. Rumors are circulating that I am unhinged, that I am too focused on bloodshed. Bringing a civilian, a respectable woman from the art world, softens my image. It is a transaction." He moved the umbrella slightly, letting the rain hit my shoulder again, a subtle reminder of the cold reality outside his sphere of influence. "The police will arrest me for destroying the lab," I countered. "The museum is owned by a holding company I control," he said. "The damage will be written off as an electrical fire. No charges. Unless you prefer to wait for the O'Sullivans to circle back." A gunshot cracked inside the museum, muffled but distinct. My hesitation shattered. He was right. I was dead if I stayed here. "I have conditions," I said, stepping away from the wall. He raised an eyebrow, looking mildly amused for the first time. "You are in an alley, wet, unarmed and hunted, and you are making demands?" "I'm not unarmed." I lifted the scalpel. "And yes, if I give you the canvas, you guarantee my safety. Not just tonight, until this blows over, and you don't hurt me. If you lay a hand on me, I go to the feds, code or no code." He looked at the scalpel, then up to my eyes. A flicker of something crossed his face. Respect, maybe? Or just calculation. "I don't hurt women, Chloe. Unless they try to kill me. Are you planning to kill me?" "Not yet," I muttered. "Then we have a deal." He stepped back and gestured to the open door of the Maybach. "Get in. Do not bleed on the leather." I lowered the scalpel, shoved it into my pocket next to the stolen masterpiece, and climbed into the back of the car. The interior was silent and smelled of expensive cedar and leather. It was warm. I huddled into the corner, dripping water onto the pristine floor mat. Silvio closed the umbrella, shook it off, and slid in beside me. The door thudded shut, sealing out the rain, the sirens that were finally wailing in the distance, and my old life. "Home," Silvio said to the driver, a wall of a man who didn't even glance in the rearview mirror. As the car pulled away, gliding over the potholes with barely a tremor, Silvio pressed a button on the armrest. A glass partition slid up, separating us from the driver. "The canvas," he said, holding out his hand. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, feeling the crinkled linen through my jacket. It was my only leverage, but looking at him, at the sheer size of him, and the calm lethality radiating from his posture, I knew keeping it wasn't an option. I pulled out the roll and placed it in his palm. He unrolled it carefully. his eyes scanning the UV reactive ink that was still faintly glowing in the dim ambient light of the car. His jaw tightened as he read the numbers. "Traitor," he murmured, a word so soft I almost missed it. "It's a ledger," I said, my voice raspy. "Shipping containers, dates, but the dates, they're all for tomorrow." He looked at me sharply. "You read it?" "I have a near eidetic memory for numbers," I lied. It wasn't eidetic, just trained, but he didn't need to know that. "The shipment is coming in during the wedding. That's why they wanted it destroyed. It's not just a record of the past. It's the schedule for a coup." Silvio rolled the canvas back up, his grip tightening around it until his knuckles turned white. He looked at me, really looked at me, not as a nuisance he had picked up in an alley, but as something else. A variable he hadn't accounted for. "You are surprisingly useful, Ms. Mitchell," he said. He reached into a compartment and pulled out a clean, dry towel. He tossed it to me. "Dry your hair. You look like a drowned rat. And we have a very early start tomorrow." "I don't have a dress," I said, wiping my face, the towel smelling of sandalwood. "And I definitely don't have shoes that match a mob wedding. My stylists will meet us at the penthouse." He dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "Sleep. You look like you're about to pass out." "I'm not sleeping," I insisted, though my adrenaline was crashing hard, leaving me trembling. "I don't trust you." "Good," Silvio said, turning his gaze to the rain-streaked window. "Trust gets you killed in my world. Keep doubting me, Chloe. It might keep you alive long enough to make it through the reception." I leaned my head back against the headrest, clutching the towel. The city lights blurred past, streaks of gold and red. I had gone to work today expecting to clean a portrait. Now, I was the date of the most dangerous man in Chicago, sitting on a leather seat that cost more than my father's bail, heading into a war I didn't understand. But as I looked at Silvio's profile, hard and unyielding against the shadows, I realized one thing. He hadn't lied to me yet. He hadn't promised me safety. He promised me protection. There was a difference. Safety was an illusion. Protection was a weapon. And right now, he was the only weapon I had. "What happens if I solve the code for you?" I asked quietly. "After the wedding?" Silvio didn't look at me. "Then you pray that the answer doesn't point to someone I love. Because if it does, I will burn this city down, and I won't care who is standing in the ashes." The car turned onto a private ramp, descending into the belly of a high-rise building. The heavy steel gates closed behind us with a finality that made my breath catch. I was in. There was no going back to the quiet lab and the solvent fumes now. "Welcome to your new reality, Kara," Silvio said as the car stopped. He opened the door waiting for me. "Try not to break anything." I stepped out, my boots squeaking on the polished garage floor, and followed the MAFIA boss into the elevator. The numbers climbed, taking us up to the penthouse, away from the rain, but definitely not away from the storm. We stood in silence as the elevator rose. The mirrored walls reflected us. Him, immaculate and imposing. Me, wet, disheveled, and holding a scalpel in my pocket like a talisman. We looked like a disaster waiting to happen. "Green," he said suddenly. I blinked, looking at him in the reflection. "What?" "For the dress tomorrow," Silvio said, his eyes meeting mine in the glass. "Green. It will match your eyes. And it's the color of money. It will make my brother nervous." "Why do you want to make your brother nervous?" I asked. "Because," Silvio said as the doors slid open, revealing a sprawling, sterile living room that looked more like a command center than a home. "Fear keeps people honest. And tomorrow, I need everyone very, very honest." He stepped out, and I followed, crossing the threshold into the lion's den. I survived the fire. Now I just had to survive the wedding. Silk felt different when you knew it might be stained with blood by the end of the night. The emerald green gown Silvio's team had selected for me was a masterpiece of architectural tailoring, draping over my frame like liquid malachite. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a back that plunged dangerously low, exposing skin I usually kept covered under lab coats. It was beautiful, undeniably so. But as I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the guest suite, all I could feel was the cold weight of the tiny earpiece nestled in my left ear canal. Test. 1, 2. Silvio's voice crackled through the device, clear and startlingly intimate, as if he were standing right inside my skull. I adjusted the diamond earring that was meant to hide the technology. I hear you. Do I really need to wear this? It's a wedding, not a covert ops mission. In my life, there is no difference, came the reply. Come out. We are leaving. I took a breath, smoothing the fabric over my hips. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the archivist who had been almost gassed to death 12 hours ago. She looked dangerous. She looked like she belonged in a world of high stakes and quiet violence. I grabbed the small, hard-shell clutch that contained nothing but a lipstick and a panic button and walked out to meet the devil. Silvio was waiting in the foyer. The sight of him made my steps falter for a fraction of a second. In the alley, he had been imposing. In a tuxedo, he was devastating. The black fabric was cut to perfection, emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the lean power of his build. He wasn't wearing a tie, but a black silk cravat that made him look like a nobleman from a century I would have studied in art history books. He turned as I approached, his dark eyes scanning me from head to toe. There was no lecherous up-and-down sweep, just a clinical assessment of his asset. Green, he noted, a ghost of approval in his tone. It works. The red hair against the emerald. It makes a statement. And what statement is that? I asked, walking past him to the elevator, refusing to let him see that my hands were trembling. That you are vibrant. Bold. A prize, he said, falling into step beside me. It distracts the eye. People will be looking at you, not at the security detail flanking us. I'm a human shield. Fantastic. You are a distraction, he corrected as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing us in the polished metal box. And you are my eyes. I need you to watch the room, Chloe. Not the people, but the things. The gifts, the displays. Wealth whispers, but desperation screams. I need to know who is screaming. The drive to Holy Name Cathedral was a blur of rain-slicked streets and tense silence. When the car stopped, the flashbulbs started. Even through the tinted windows, the strobe light effect of the paparazzi was blinding. Stay close to me, Silvio ordered. He didn't offer his arm. He took mine, tucking it securely against his side. His grip was firm, grounding. Head up. You belong here because I say you belong here. The doors opened, and the noise hit us. A wall of shouting reporters and curious onlookers. I let Silvio guide me through the gauntlet, my face a mask of bored indifference. Inside the cathedral, the chaos vanished, replaced by the heavy, suffocating scent of frankincense and expensive lilies. The pews were filled with the kind of people who ran Chicago. Politicians, judges, business tycoons, and men whose suits fit too well, and whose eyes moved too much. The air was thick with tension. This wasn't just a union of two people. It was a merger of empires. We walked down the side aisle. I felt eyes on me. Curious, assessing, jealous. But the real storm broke when we reached the front, where the groom was waiting. Marco Giardoni looked like a younger, softer version of Silvio. He had the same dark hair, but his jaw lacked the ruthless edge, and his eyes were full of a nervous energy that bordered on manic. He was laughing with a groomsman until he saw us. His smile died instantly. His gaze locked onto me, then widened in disbelief. He stepped forward, ignoring the priest, ignoring the sanctity of the altar. Silvio, Marco said, his voice carrying in the sudden hush of the cathedral. What is she doing here? Silvio didn't stop walking until we were face to face with his brother. She is my date, Marco. Focus on your bride. Your date? Marco's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He pointed a trembling finger at me. Do you think I don't know who she is? That is Chloe Mitchell, the daughter of Arthur Mitchell. The name rippled through the front rows like a shockwave. Whispers broke out, sharp and hissing. The accountant, the thief, the traitor. My spine stiffened. My father hadn't stolen a dime. He had been the fall guy for a massive internal embezzlement scheme he had tried to expose. But to these people, He was the rat who had nearly brought the Giardoni Empire down 20 years ago. "Get her out of here," Marco hissed, stepping closer, his hands clenched into fists. "This is an insult. On my wedding day, you bring the spawn of the man who stole millions from us?" I felt the urge to shrink, to apologize, to run. It was the reaction I had been trained for, to de-escalate, to disappear. But then I felt Silvio's hand move from my arm to the small of my back. It wasn't a push. It was a wall. He was standing between me and the room's hostility. "Careful, brother," Silvio said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a timbre that cut through the murmurs like a blade. "You are speaking to my guest." "She is the daughter of a rat," Marco spat. "She is under my protection," Silvio stated, his tone dropping an octave, becoming absolute zero. "And she is with me, which means she is family. Unless you are telling me that you question my judgment in my own house?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Marco looked at Silvio, then at the gathered captains and associates watching the exchange with rapt attention. To challenge Silvio now would be a declaration of war. Marco swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, but he stepped back. "This isn't over," Marco muttered. "It never is," Silvio replied smoothly. He guided me to the front pew, right behind the family section. "Sit." I sank onto the velvet cushion, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought the fabric of my dress would vibrate. "You didn't tell me your brother knew my face," I whispered furiously, staring straight ahead at the crucifix. "I needed to see how he would react," Silvio murmured back, leaning close enough that his breath brushed my ear. To an observer, it looked like a lover's confidence. Genuine anger. "He didn't know you were coming. That means he isn't the one who hired the O'Sullivans to kill you last night. If he wanted you dead, he wouldn't be shouting. He would be smiling." "So I'm bait," I concluded. "Again. You are a catalyst, Chloe. Enjoy the ceremony." The wedding was a blur of Latin chants and operatic solos. I couldn't focus on the vows. I was too busy scanning the perimeter, analyzing the faces of the men standing near the exits. The earpiece remained silent, which was the only comfort I had. The reception was held at the Peninsula Hotel, in a ballroom that dripped with crystal and gold leaf. It was a scene of aggressive opulence. Waiters moved like synchronized swimmers, pouring vintage champagne and serving hors d'oeuvres that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Silvio kept me tethered to him. We moved through the crowd, and I played my part. I smiled. I nodded. I let him introduce me to men who undoubtedly had bodies buried in the foundations of the buildings they owned. But my eyes were constantly moving, dissecting the room as if it were a damaged fresco. "Tell me what you see," Silvio commanded softly, as we stood near a towering ice sculpture of a swan. "Structural instability," I murmured, taking a sip of sparkling water. "Not the building. The alliances. The man in the gray suit by the bar. He's sweating, and he keeps checking the time. He's terrified of someone. And that woman in the red dress. She's wearing a Van Cleef necklace that's a knockoff. The setting is too bulky. If the wife of a capo is wearing fake jewelry, cash flow is a problem." Silvio's lips quirked upward. "That is Vinny the Hammer. And yes, he has gambling debts. Good eye. I look for flaws for a living," I reminded him. "Perfection is usually a lie." A commotion near the head table drew our attention. It was the presentation of gifts. Traditionally, the families exchanged significant tokens of wealth to seal the bond. Marco stood with his new bride, a waif-like brunette named Elena Vertiani. Her father, Don Vertiani, a heavy-set man with a florid face, was gesturing grandly to a veiled easel. "A gift for my new son," Vertiani boomed, his voice slurred with too much wine. "From my private collection. A lost masterwork, returned to the light." He pulled the velvet sheet away. The crowd gasped politely. It was a painting of the Madonna and Child, stylized in the manner of the High Renaissance. The colors were vibrant, lapis lazuli blues and vermilion reds. "A Raphael," Vertiani announced proudly. Authentication papers included. Silvio stiffened beside me. "A Raphael? Vertiani barely has enough liquidity to pay his soldiers. How did he afford a $50 million painting?" I stepped closer. narrowing my eyes. The crowd was applauding, but my brain shifted into professional mode. I ignored the subject matter and focused on the technical details. The lighting in the ballroom was designed to flatter people, not art, but it was enough. I tugged on Silvio's sleeve. We need to get closer. He maneuvered us through the throng until we were only a few feet away. I studied the painting, while Marco shook his father-in-law's hand vigorously. The blue of the Madonna's robe. It was too flat. Lapis lazuli in the 16th century had a specific crystalline structure that caught the light in a way modern pigments didn't. And the cracks. The craquelure on the surface. It was a spiderweb pattern, typical of forced drying in an oven, not the rectangular block pattern of natural aging on wood panels. It's a fake, I whispered to Silvio. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on Versiani. Are you certain? 100%, I said, my voice low. The blue pigment is Prussian blue. It wasn't invented until the early 1700s. Raphael died in 1520. That painting is less than 10 years old. It's a very good forgery, probably Italian market, but it's worthless. Silvio's hand tightened on his glass. Versiani is broke, he deduced instantly. He is marrying his daughter into my family to save himself from bankruptcy. He is presenting a fake asset to buy his way into our protection. If he's lying about the money, I added, connecting the dots. He's desperate. Desperate men make bad deals, maybe even deals with the Irish. Silvio's expression didn't change, but the temperature around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. You just justified your presence here 10 times over, Chloe. Before he could act on the information, a waiter appeared at our elbow. He was young, pale, and holding a silver tray with 2 fresh flutes of champagne. Compliments of the groom, Mr. Giardoni, the waiter mumbled, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. Silvio reached for the glass. It was a peace offering. To refuse a toast from the groom at his own wedding would be the ultimate insult. I watched the waiter's hand. It was shaking, just a tremor, and there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. My gaze snapped to the glass Silvio was lifting to his lips. The bubbles. They were sluggish. Champagne should fizz aggressively, but there was something else. A faint, oily residue clinging to the rim of the crystal, invisible unless you spent your life staring at microscopic varnish layers. Silvio, I said. He was already tilting the glass. Panic, hot and electric, surged through me. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I acted. I spun on my heel, feigning a stumble in my high stilettos. I threw my arm out as if to catch my balance, and my hand collided violently with Silvio's forearm. The glass flew from his grip. It shattered against the marble floor with a sound that silenced the nearby conversations. The golden liquid splashed across the pristine white tablecloth of a nearby table and onto Silvio's polished shoes. "Oh my God," I gasped, playing the part of the clumsy civilian date to perfection. I grabbed his lapel, steadying myself. "I am so sorry." My heel, it caught on the rug. The waiter looked terrified. He didn't offer a napkin. He didn't apologize. He backed away, his face draining of color, and then turned and vanished into the kitchen crowd. Silvio stood frozen. He looked at the shattered glass, then at the liquid frothing slightly on the marble. It was sizzling. Faintly, but it was reacting with the floor wax. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown. He had seen the waiter run. He had seen the sizzle. He knew. "You clumsy girl," he said loudly, his voice filled with a mock irritation that masked a profound realization. He grabbed my wrist, his grip bruising. "Look at this mess." He pulled me close, ostensibly to check for wine stains on his suit, but his mouth was inches from my ear. "You saw it?" he demanded, his voice a lethal whisper. "The bubbles were wrong," I whispered back, my heart slamming against his chest. And the waiter, he was terrified. "Don't drink anything, don't eat anything." Silvio straightened up, releasing my wrist but keeping his hand on my lower back. He looked around the room, a predator who had just realized the jungle was burning. "Marco didn't send that drink," Silvio said, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Versiani, who was sweating profusely near the fake Raphael. "But someone let that waiter in." He turned to me, and for the first time, The mask of the MAFIA boss slipped. I saw the man beneath. The man who had almost just died in front of 300 people. "Stay by my side," he ordered. And this time, it wasn't about appearances. "If you move 1 inch away from me, I will chain you to my wrist. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, watching the spot where the champagne was eating into the floor polish. "We need to leave." "Not yet," Silvio said, buttoning his jacket. A cold, terrifying smile spread across his face. "First, I need to congratulate the father of the bride on his magnificent gift. And then, I need to find that waiter and ask him who paid for the poison." He steered me toward the head table. The music played on, a cheerful waltz that jarred horribly with the reality of the moment. I walked beside him, head high, green dress flowing, fully aware that I had just crossed the line from witness to accomplice. I had saved the monster's life, and now, the monster was going to hunt. "If this goes sideways," I whispered, "I don't have a weapon." Silvio reached into his jacket pocket and pressed something cold and heavy into my hand, concealing the transfer with his body. It was a small, compact folding knife. "Don't hesitate," he said. I clutched the steel, my thumb resting on the release mechanism. The archivist was gone. Survival was the only thing left. We approached Verciani, and as Silvio extended his hand to the sweating older man, I saw the truth in his eyes. Verciani knew. He knew about the fake painting, and he knew about the poison. The wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a trap, and we were standing in the center of the jaw, waiting for it to snap shut. If I played my role perfectly, a man who had spent 20 years rotting for someone else's crime might finally step into the sun. The ride back to the penthouse was executed with military precision. There were no flashing lights, no sirens, just a convoy of 3 black SUVs moving in a tight formation that discouraged anyone from getting too close. Inside the cabin, the silence was heavier than the humid Chicago air outside. Silvio didn't speak. He was on his phone, typing rapid-fire messages, his jaw set in a line so hard it looked painful. I sat on the opposite side of the leather bench, clutching the folding knife he had given me, the metal warm against my palm. We had just walked out of a wedding that was essentially a declaration of war. My green dress, which had felt like armor an hour ago, now felt like a target. When the elevator finally opened directly into his penthouse, the change in atmosphere was jarring. The lobby had been chaotic, filled with the muffled shouts of security teams securing the perimeter. Here, 80 stories up, it was dead silent. The space was vast, a sprawling expanse of polished concrete, floor-to-ceiling glass, and furniture that looked like it had been carved from blocks of ice. It was beautiful, in a sterile, terrifying way. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a command center for a man who expected the world to attack him at any moment. "Stay here," Silvio ordered, tossing his jacket onto a low gray sofa. He loosened his silk cravat, looking like a man who wanted to tear his own skin off. "Do not go near the windows. Do not answer the landline. If the security panel by the door turns red, you go into the panic room behind the library bookshelf, and you lock it from the inside." "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the empty room. "To clean up the mess," he said, checking the clip of a handgun he had pulled from a drawer in the entryway console. "The waiter who served the champagne is currently being debriefed. I need to know who paid him before the trail goes cold." "It was Verciani," I said, stepping forward. "You saw his face." "I know it was Verciani," Silvio snapped, his eyes flashing with a cold, contained violence. "But Verciani is a coward. He doesn't have the spine to poison a Giardoni on his own. Someone gave him the courage, and someone gave him the poison. I'm going to find out who." He walked to the elevator, punched a code, and the doors began to slide shut. "Silvio," I called out. He paused, his hand on the sensor. "I need a computer," I said. "And I need access to your family's shipping archives from the last 20 years. He stared at me, his brow furrowing. "Why?" "Because while you're out there breaking fingers to get answers, I can find the money trail without leaving this room," I told him, keeping my chin high. "The painting in the lab, the fake Raphael at the wedding, the numbers. It's all connected to the Port Authority. If Verciani is broke, he's moving something illegal to get liquid cash fast." The code I found. I think I can crack the location. For a second, I thought he would refuse. I thought he would tell me to sit down and look pretty like a good little hostage. But Silvio Giardoni was a pragmatist before he was a misogynist. "I'll authorize the terminal in the dining room," he said. "Don't make me regret giving you the password." The doors closed, and I was alone in the fortress. I didn't waste time exploring. I kicked off the emerald satin heels, leaving them where they fell, and walked barefoot across the cold concrete to the massive dining table. It was a slab of volcanic rock, sleek and black. A laptop sat at one end, looking incongruously modern against the prehistoric stone. I sat down, the silk of my dress pooling around me, and woke the screen. A prompt appeared. Biometric or passcode required. A moment later, a message popped up on the screen. Access granted. User, Guest Mitchell. Restricted clearance. Restricted, I muttered. We'll see about that. I wasn't a hacker, but I was an archivist. My entire career was built on finding things that people had tried very hard to hide within mountains of boring data. I pulled the digital image of the painting I had scanned with my phone in the car, before Silvio had taken the original canvas. The numbers were glowing in the photo, stark against the UV light. 89 to 22 Alpha NC 44. It looked like a coordinate, or maybe a serial number. I opened the Giardoni shipping database. It was a labyrinth of shell companies, legitimate imports of olive oil and marble, and less legitimate imports of automotive parts. I started cross-referencing. The NC likely stood for North Cargo, a terminal that had been decommissioned in the late 90s. My father had mentioned it once in his journals, the place where the ghost ships docked. Ships that didn't appear on the official harbor master's log. I worked for hours. The sun began to set, turning the gray penthouse into a box of orange and violet shadows. But I didn't turn on the lights. The glow of the monitor was enough. I felt a strange, manic clarity. This was what I did. I restored order to chaos. I took fragmented, damaged history and made it whole again. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since the protein bar I'd had before the museum shift yesterday, but I ignored it. I was close. The pattern was in the dates. Every time a fake art transaction occurred, like the Raphael today, there was a corresponding shipping container logged as empty return entering the North Cargo terminal, exactly 48 hours later. Verziani wasn't just selling fake art to get money. He was using the art auctions to launder the payment for something coming in. Weapons, I whispered to the empty room. Or people. A heavy thud from the entryway broke my concentration. I spun around in the chair, my hand instinctively going to the clutch on the table where the knife was hidden. The elevator doors were open. Silvio walked in. He looked terrible. The pristine tuxedo was gone. He was in a white dress shirt that was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. But the white cotton was ruined. A dark, wet stain was spreading across his left side, just above the hip, and there was a smear of blood on his cheekbone that wasn't his. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. "Silvio!" I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Sit down," he rasped, waving a hand dismissively. He walked straight to the wet bar, poured a glass of amber liquid that looked like whiskey, and downed it in one swallow. He grimaced, gripping the edge of the bar until his knuckles turned white. "You're bleeding," I said, ignoring his order and walking toward him. "It's a graze," he said, pouring another drink. The waiter had friends. They were waiting in the alley behind the hotel. "Did you—" I let the question hang. "They won't be serving poison to anyone else," he said flatly. He turned to look at me, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but burning with that same intense intelligence. "Did you find anything? Or did you just browse my family history?" "I found everything," I said, stopping a few feet from him. The smell of copper, gunpowder, and expensive scotch was overwhelming. "But you need to sit down before you bleed out on your rug. I have a doctor on retainer," he muttered, but he swayed slightly. "A doctor who will ask questions," I countered. "And right now, you don't know who to trust. If Verziani got to the waiter, he might have gotten to your medical staff too." Silvio stared at me. He looked at the blood soaking through his shirt, then back at my face. He seemed to be weighing the risk. Finally, he let out a short, cynical laugh. "You're a restorer," he said. "You fix paintings. Do you think I am a piece of canvas?" "Flesh is easier than canvas," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Canvas doesn't heal itself." "You do. I just need to close the gap. Sit down, Silvio." He hesitated for one more second, then walked over to the leather sofa and sat heavily. He hissed in pain as he leaned back. "There's a first aid kit in the bathroom under the sink," he directed, closing his eyes. "It's a trauma kit. Use the good stuff." I ran to the bathroom. It was more like a spa, all marble and chrome. I found the kit. It was military grade. Sutures, coagulant gauze, antiseptic, lidocaine. I grabbed everything and ran back. Silvio had unbuttoned his shirt, exposing his torso. He was lean and corded with muscle, his skin tanned and marked with a few faint white lines of old scars. Knives, maybe, or wire. But the fresh wound was ugly. A bullet had grazed his side, carving a deep furrow through the muscle but missing the bone and vital organs. It was bleeding sluggishly but constantly. I knelt beside him on the floor, my green dress spreading around me like a pool of water. "This is going to hurt," I said, putting on a pair of nitrile gloves from the kit. "Just do it," he gritted out, staring at the ceiling. I cleaned the wound with saline and antiseptic. He didn't flinch, but his abdominal muscles spasmed under my fingers. It was an intimate, visceral sensation, touching the source of his power and his vulnerability simultaneously. "You were right," he said, his voice tight as I threaded the suture needle. "About the waiter. He confirmed it before he died. Verciani promised him 50 grand to spike my drink, but Verciani didn't pay him. The money came from an offshore account linked to the O'Sullivans. Hold still," I murmured. I pierced the skin. Silvio took a sharp breath through his nose but didn't make a sound. I worked quickly, using the same precise small stitches I used to repair torn linen fibers on 17th century tapestries. Close the gap. Align the edges. Restore the integrity of the surface. "Why are you doing this?" he asked suddenly. He wasn't looking at the ceiling anymore. He was looking down at me. I didn't look up. I focused on the knot I was tying. "Because you're my best chance of survival. If you die, I'm left alone in this penthouse until your enemies come to finish the job." "Pragmatic," he noted. "I like that. Most women would be crying or asking me if I was in pain. Pain is information," I said, snipping the thread. "It tells you you're still alive. And crying doesn't stop bleeding." I applied a sterile pad and taped it down. "Done. It's clean. Keep it dry." I peeled off the gloves and sat back on my heels, finally meeting his gaze. He was watching me with an intensity that made the air in the room feel thin. There was no gratitude in his eyes, but there was recognition. He saw me. Not the accessory, not the liability. The partner. "Now," he said, buttoning his ruined shirt halfway up. "Tell me what you found." I stood up and walked to the dining table, picking up the laptop. I brought it to him, sitting on the coffee table opposite the sofa. "The code on the painting," I explained, turning the screen so he could see the map I had pulled up. "It's a substitution cipher based on shipping container IDs. The numbers correspond to dates. Tomorrow night, at 0300 hours, a container is scheduled to arrive at Terminal 4. That's the North Cargo Terminal." Silvio frowned. "Terminal 4 has been shut down for years. It's a rusted heap. Nothing docks there." "Exactly," I said. "That's why it's perfect. It's a ghost terminal. But the O'Sullivans have reactivated the crane protocols. I found the power spikes in the city grid. They're bringing something in, Silvio. Something big enough that they needed to buy off the Port Authority and marry into your family to cover the noise." Silvio leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his side. He studied the data, his eyes darting across the columns of numbers. "Not drugs," he muttered. "Too much risk for a dead terminal. And not weapons. We have plenty of those." He pointed to a column I had highlighted in red. "What is this?" "That," I said, "is the weight discrepancy. The manifest says marble statuary, but the crane load sensors from the last shipment, the one that corresponds to the fake Raphael, registered a weight that fluctuates. Marble doesn't fluctuate. Marble doesn't move. Silvio looked at me, his face hardening into stone. People. Human trafficking? I felt a wave of nausea. No. Silvio shook his head slowly. Soldiers. They aren't bringing in victims, Chloe. They are bringing in an army. The O'Sullivans are importing mercenaries from overseas. Men with no records, no fingerprints, and no hesitation. They are building a hit squad to wipe out my family in one night. The silence that followed was deafening. If he was right, the wedding wasn't just a trap. It was a distraction while the real invasion force arrived at the docks. We have to call the police, I said. Though I knew as soon as the words left my mouth how stupid they sounded. Silvio gave me a look that was almost pitying. The police? Who do you think cleared the zoning permits for a closed terminal to be active again? The chief of police was at the wedding. He was eating cake while I was almost poisoned. He stood up, groaning slightly as his side protested. He walked to the window, looking out at the city of light spread below us. A kingdom he was about to lose. We are alone, he said. My brother is compromised by his wife's family. My captains are scattered. If I call for a mobilization now, the rat, whoever gave Versiani the order, will know I survived and they will accelerate the timeline. So what do we do? I asked, standing up. I was still wearing the green dress, still barefoot, but I felt different. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was the one holding the map. Silvio turned back to face me. The shadows cast sharp angles across his face. We go to the source, he said. We go to Terminal 4. We intercept the shipment before it unloads. We? I stepped back. No, absolutely not. I did my part. I decoded the message. I stitched you up. I am not going to a haunted dock to fight an army of mercenaries. You have to, Silvio said, his voice calm and unyielding. Because the encryption key for the container locks changes every hour. It's based on the painting's algorithm. You are the only one who can calculate it in real time. If we try to blow the doors, the fail-safes will sink the container. We need to open it quietly to get the proof I need to expose the O'Sullivans to the commission. I am an archivist, I shouted, the stress finally cracking my composure. I restore art. I don't break into shipping containers. Silvio crossed the distance between us in 2 strides. He didn't touch me, but he stood close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. You are not just an archivist anymore, Chloe, he said low and rough. You are the woman who saved my life twice in 12 hours. You are the only person in this city I know isn't trying to sell me out. I need you, not as a hostage, as a partner. He held out his hand. The same hand that had held a gun. The same hand that had offered me safety in the rain. Help me stop this, he said. Help me save my family. And I swear on my mother's grave, I will give you anything you want. Freedom, money, a new identity. Anything. I looked at his hand. Then I looked at the knife still clutching in my left hand. I thought about my father, rotting in a cell because he didn't have the power to fight back. I thought about the men in the museum with the gas cans. If I walked away, Silvio might die. And if he died, the O'Sullivans would come for me anyway. There was no out. There was only through. I took a deep breath, the scent of his cologne and antiseptic filling my lungs. I don't want a new identity, I said, placing my hand in his. His grip was warm and solid. I want my father's name cleared, and I want to burn the people who framed him. Silvio's fingers closed around mine, a pact sealed in blood and desperation. Then get your shoes, Piccola, he said, a dangerous light igniting in his eyes. We have a shipment to intercept. I turned back to the table, grabbed the laptop, and shoved my feet back into the killing heels. I wasn't ready. I was terrified. But as I walked toward the elevator next to the most dangerous man in Chicago, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't trembling anymore. The silence of the industrial district was deceptive. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a library or a museum after hours. It was the held breath of a predator waiting to strike. The port of Chicago stretched out before us, like a graveyard of steel and rust, a labyrinth of stacked shipping containers that blotted out the city skyline. The air here tasted different, heavy with diesel fumes, rotting algae, and the metallic tang of salt water. Silvio killed the engine of the SUV a mile away from the entrance to Terminal 4. The headlights died, plunging us into darkness. "This is as close as we get," he said, his voice low. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a tactical vest. He winced as he shrugged it on over his dress shirt, the Kevlar pulling tight against the fresh stitches in his side. I watched him check his weapon, a matte black pistol that looked terrifyingly efficient in his hands. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a soldier going to war. "You stay in the car," he ordered, checking the sightline through the windshield. "Lock the doors. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, you drive away. You don't look back. You go straight to the federal building and you ask for Agent Miller. He's the only one on the payroll who isn't ours or theirs." I looked at him, then down at my satin heels. "We've been over this, Silvio. You can't open the container without me. The algorithm changes based on the title charts and the date of the original painting's creation. It's a rolling cipher. Unless you have a degree in Renaissance numerology and the current shipping manifests memorized, you're just going to set off the silent alarm. I can blow the lock," he countered, though his face was pale. The blood loss from earlier was affecting him more than he admitted. "And trigger the scuttling charges?" I reminded him, repeating the intel we had found on the laptop. "The O'Sullivans rigged the container to sink if forced. You lose the evidence, you lose the war. You need me." Silvio stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. He must have seen something that satisfied him. Or maybe he just didn't have the energy to argue. "Stay behind me," he said finally. "If I say run, you run. If I say drop, you drop. Do not try to be a hero." "I'm not a hero," I whispered, opening the door and stepping out into the cold night air. "I'm just tired of being a victim." We moved toward the fence line. I had kicked off the high heels in the car, opting to go barefoot. The ground was cold and littered with sharp gravel and broken glass, but the silence was worth the pain. In the green dress, I felt like a ghost drifting through the wreckage of the industrial age. Silvio moved with a fluid grace that defied his injury. He cut through the chain-link fence with a pair of shears he'd brought, creating a gap just wide enough for us to slip through. We were inside. Terminal 4 was supposed to be dead. The cranes loomed overhead like skeletal dinosaurs, rusted and still. But as we crept deeper into the maze of containers, I saw signs of life. Fresh tire tracks in the mud, a cigarette butt that hadn't fully disintegrated. The O'Sullivans were here. "Third row, fourth stack," Silvio signaled with a hand motion, his voice barely a breath. We hugged the shadows of the containers, moving deeper into the grid. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to drown out the distant sound of water lapping against the pier. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every creak of metal settling in the cold sounded like a sniper adjusting his aim. We found it. It didn't look special. It was a standard 40-foot container, painted a dull, peeling red, with the ID number TR8922 stenciled in white on the side. But unlike the others, this one had a modern electronic keypad welded over the standard latch mechanism. A small red LED blinked rhythmically, a digital heartbeat warning us away. "This is it," Silvio whispered. He scanned the perimeter, his gun raised. "Work your magic, Chloe. Fast." I stepped up to the keypad. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to still. I closed my eyes for a second, visualizing the painting in the lab, the merchant's hand, the specific pattern of the cracks, the hidden numbers. 15 and 20, the year Raphael died, plus the current date, minus the terminal number. I punched in the first sequence. The light blinked yellow. "Hurry!" Silvio hissed. He was looking up at the crane tower overlooking our position. "I have to synchronize it," I murmured, sweat prickling on my forehead despite the cold. "It's a 2-stage authentication." I typed the second sequence, based on the shipping weight discrepancy I had noticed in the file. 4,400. The light turned green. A heavy mechanical clunk echoed from inside the door mechanism. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "It's open." Silvio moved instantly. He didn't just throw the door open. He cracked it slightly, checking for tripwires. Finding none, he slid the heavy metal door back, the hinges groaning in protest. He raised his tactical light, slicing through the darkness of the container's interior. I expected to see men. I expected soldiers with assault rifles sitting on benches, waiting to storm the city. Instead, the beam of light illuminated wooden crates. Dozens of them. They were stamped with the logos of agricultural machinery parts, but the wood was high-quality pine, the kind used for museum transport. Not mercenaries? Silvio asked, stepping inside, his gun still raised. No, I said, following him. The smell inside was distinct. Sawdust and old canvas. Collateral. I walked to the nearest crate. It had been pried open recently, the lid resting loosely on top. I pushed it aside and shone my phone's flashlight into the box. I gasped. Resting on a bed of velvet and shock-absorbing foam was a golden statuette, distinctly pre-Columbian. Beside it, a rolled tapestry that looked Flemish. "These are stolen," I said, my voice trembling with professional outrage. "This isn't just smuggling. This is the O'Sullivan's Reserve Bank. These items, Silvio, this crate alone is worth $10 million on the black market. They aren't paying the mercenaries with cash. They're paying them with liquid assets that can't be frozen by the feds. It's their war chest," Silvio realized, holstering his weapon to rip open another crate. "If we take this, they can't pay the army they hired. The invasion stops before it starts." "Wait," I said, spotting a smaller flat metal box tucked between two larger crates. It looked like a lockbox, the kind used on ships for captain's logs. I pulled it out. It wasn't locked. I flipped the latch and opened it. Inside wasn't gold or jewels. It was a stack of leather-bound notebooks, old ones. I picked up the top one. The handwriting was meticulous, slanted, and painfully familiar. "This is my father's handwriting," I choked out. Silvio froze. He turned to me, the shadows of the container casting long lines across his face. "What?" I opened the book, my fingers tracing the ink. "It's a shadow log." He kept a duplicate record of every transaction he was forced to sign off on. "He didn't steal the money, Silvio. He was tracking where it went." I flipped the pages frantically. "Look. Here. Transfer authorized by Capo Versiani under duress. And here. O'Sullivan account linked to shell company in the Caymans." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. "He was building a case. He was going to come to your father with this. That's why they framed him. He wasn't a rat. He was a loyalist who got caught in a coup." Silvio stepped closer, looking down at the book. The realization hit him visible. A physical weight settling on his shoulders. For 20 years his family had hated a man who had actually tried to save them. "We were wrong," Silvio said, his voice rough. "My father, he killed the wrong man's reputation. You have to fix this," I said, looking up at him, gripping the book to my chest. "You have to clear his name." "I will," Silvio promised. He reached out, his hand brushing my cheek, wiping away a smudge of grease. "I swear it. We take this book. We take the—" Crack. The sound of a high-velocity rifle shot shattered the air. A spark of fire exploded from the metal wall of the container, inches from Silvio's head. "Down!" Silvio roared. He tackled me. We hit the metal floor of the container hard, the impact jarring the breath from my lungs. A split second later, the air was filled with the deafening ping, ping, ping of automatic fire, strafing the side of the container. "They found us!" Silvio shouted over the noise, rolling off me and scrambling to a crouch behind a stack of crates. He drew his weapon. "Stay low. Keep the book safe." "Where are they?" I screamed, crawling toward him, the wood of the crates digging into my knees. "The crane tower!" Silvio returned fire, squeezing off 3 controlled shots through the open door. "Snipers! And ground team moving in from the north." He hissed in pain, clutching his side. The tackle had torn his stitches. Fresh blood was already staining the white shirt under his vest. "You can't fight them all," I said, looking at the door. The angle of fire was pinning us inside. If we tried to run, we'd be cut down. If we stayed, they'd toss a grenade in and turn this metal box into an oven. "I can hold them off," Silvio gritted out, reloading. "I need you to make a run for the gap in the fence. Go." "I am not leaving you," I yelled back. "Chloe, go!" "No!" I looked around frantically. We were trapped. The only exit was the door we came in, and it was a kill zone. My eyes landed on a heavy industrial control panel mounted on the back wall of the container. It had a thick cable running out the back, connecting to the external power supply of the terminal. "The crane," I said, a desperate idea forming. "The container is plugged into the terminal's main grid because of the climate control for the art. If I can reverse the polarity on the external winch." "Speak English." Silvio fired 2 more shots, ducking as a bullet ricocheted off the crate next to his head, sending splinters flying. "The crane overhead." I pointed up. "It's holding a stack of empty containers right above the open space in front of us. If I short the magnetic lock from here, the load drops. You want to drop 5 tons of steel?" "It will create a wall," I shouted. "It blocks their line of sight from the tower and gives us cover to run." "Do it!" Silvio commanded, turning back to the door to lay down suppressive fire. I scrambled to the panel. It was locked with a simple key, but I didn't have a key. I jammed the heel of my palm against the plastic cover, smashing it. I saw the wires, red, blue, ground. I used the folding knife Silvio had given me to strip the casing. Sparks flew, stinging my hands. I needed to bridge the connection to the emergency release. Outside, the shouting was getting closer. "Flank them! Grenade out! Chloe!" Silvio roared. "Almost!" I jammed the knife blade across the 2 main terminals. A massive arc of blue electricity exploded from the panel, throwing me backward. Above us, a metallic screech tore through the night, followed by a thunderous crash that shook the ground like an earthquake. Boom! The stack of containers dropped. The gunfire stopped instantly, replaced by shouts of confusion and the cloud of dust that billowed into our container, choking us. "Move! Now!" Silvio was at my side, hauling me up. We sprinted out the door. The dropped containers had landed exactly where I hoped, creating a chaotic wall of steel between us and the sniper tower. The dust cloud gave us visual cover. We ran. My bare feet bled on the gravel, but I didn't feel it. Silvio was limping heavily now, his arm draped over my shoulder for support, my arm around his waist. We were a 3-legged creature of survival, moving blindly through the industrial maze. We reached the fence line. The SUV was still there, a dark shadow in the night. We practically fell against the side of the car. Silvio fumbled for the keys, dropping them in the dirt. He fell to his knees to get them, his breathing ragged and wet. I grabbed the keys and unlocked the doors. "Get in. I'm driving. I can—" He started to protest, but his face was gray. "Get in the car, Silvio." I shoved him into the passenger seat. I scrambled into the driver's side, cranked the engine, and slammed the accelerator. The tires spun on the gravel before catching traction, and we rocketed away from the terminal just as the first searchlights from the O'Sullivans swept the area where we had been seconds ago. I didn't slow down until we were on the highway, merging into the late-night traffic of Chicago. My hands were shaking so hard on the steering wheel I could barely keep the car in the lane. "We made it," I whispered, the adrenaline crash hitting me like a physical blow. "We actually made it." I glanced over at Silvio. He was slumped against the door, his hand pressed over his wound. But he was watching me. His eyes were burning. "Pull over," he rasped. "What? No. You need a hospital, or a vet, or whatever you use. Pull over, Chloe. Now." There was an urgency in his voice that wasn't about pain. I steered the car onto the shoulder of the highway, under the orange glow of a street lamp. Before I could even put the car in park, Silvio reached across the console. His hand, sticky with blood, grabbed the back of my neck. He pulled me toward him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't tentative. It was a collision. His mouth crushed against mine, tasting of copper and fury. It was the desperate, primal reaction of a man who had stared death in the face and decided he wanted to live. I froze for a heartbeat, shocked by the sudden violence of it. But then the adrenaline spiked again. I kissed him back. I grabbed the lapels of his ruined shirt and pulled him closer, matching his intensity. It was a release of all the terror, the anger, the confusion of the last 24 hours. We broke apart, gasping for air, our foreheads resting against each other. "You," Silvio growled, his voice rough against my lips. "You dropped a building on them." It was a stack of containers, I panted, my eyes closed. You are insane, he murmured, his thumb stroking my jawline. And you are magnificent. I opened my eyes. He was looking at me with a raw vulnerability I suspected no one had ever seen. The mask was gone. The MAFIA boss was gone. There was just a man, bleeding and amazed, looking at the woman who had saved him. The book, I said, glancing at the leather journal sitting on the dashboard where I had thrown it. We have the proof. We have everything, Silvio corrected. He leaned back, wincing, his energy fading fast. Drive, Chloe. Take us to the safe house in the woods. I can't go back to the penthouse. They'll be watching it. The woods? I put the car back in gear. I don't know where that is. I'll guide you, he whispered, his eyes closing. Just don't let me fall asleep. Stay with me, Giardoni, I said, merging back onto the empty road. You owe me a new dress, and you owe my father a pension. I'll buy you the world, he mumbled, his speech slurring slightly. Just keep driving. I drove into the darkness, the city fading behind us. I was barefoot, covered in grease and dust, wearing a ruined designer gown, driving a bullet-riddled Maybach with a dying mob boss beside me. I had never felt more terrified, and I had never felt more alive. The archivist was dead. Something else had been born in that container. And as I looked at Silvio's sleeping face, I realized that whatever this was, it was far from over. This was just the beginning of the war. But this time, I wasn't fighting alone. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape from the shipping terminal was evaporating, replaced by a cold, trembling exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. The Maybach, now battered and streaked with mud, hummed steadily as we tore down the dark highway, putting miles between us and the burning wreckage of the O'Sullivan's operation. Beside me, Silvio was fading. His breathing had turned shallow. A wet rasp. But this time, I wasn't fighting alone. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape from the shipping terminal was evaporating, replaced by a cold, trembling exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. The Maybach, now battered and streaked with mud, hummed steadily as we tore down the dark highway, putting miles between us and the burning wreckage of the O'Sullivan's operation. Beside me, Silvio was fading. His breathing had turned shallow, a wet, rasping sound that terrified me more than the gunfire had. Keep your eyes open, Giardoni, I commanded, my voice shaking. Do not die on me in a stolen car. That is not how this story ends. I'm not dying, he mumbled, his head lolling against the window. Just resting my eyes. Turn right, at the mile marker. I squinted through the rain-lashed windshield. We were miles outside the city limits now, deep in the forest preserve north of Chicago. The trees pressed in close to the road, a tunnel of black branches that seemed to swallow the headlights. I found the marker, a rusted sign for a logging trail, and swerved the heavy sedan onto the gravel path. The car bounced violently over the uneven ground. Under normal circumstances, I would have been terrified of getting stuck. Tonight, I drove with a reckless determination born of sheer panic. How far? I asked. End of the road, Silvio whispered. Gate. Code is 1984. Orwell? Really? I let out a hysterical breath of a laugh. My birth year, he corrected dryly. We reached a heavy iron gate blocking the path. I punched the code into the keypad. The gears groaned, but the gate swung open. I drove through, the headlights illuminating a structure that looked less like a safe house and more like a fortress disguised as a cabin. It was built of dark timber and stone, blending perfectly into the shadows of the forest. I parked the car near the entrance, killing the engine. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. No sirens, no gunfire. Just the wind in the trees and the ticking of the cooling engine. We're here, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. Silvio? He didn't answer. Silvio! I scrambled out of the car and ran to the passenger side. I threw the door open. He was conscious, but barely. His skin was gray, clammy to the touch, and the blood had soaked through the tactical vest, staining the leather seat. I can walk, he grunted, trying to push himself up. Shut up and lean on me, I ordered. I wedged my shoulder under his arm, wrapping my arm around his waist. He was heavy, a solid wall of muscle and dead weight, but adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. We stumbled up the stone steps to the front door. He fumbled for a key hidden under a loose stone in the wall, a cliché that would have made me roll my eyes if I wasn't so busy trying to keep him upright, and unlocked the heavy oak door. We spilled inside. The interior was freezing. The air smelled of stale cedar and dust. It hadn't been used in months. "Couch," Silvio directed, pointing to a massive leather sofa in the center of the main room. I helped him down. He collapsed onto the cushions with a groan that was half pain, half relief. "First aid," he gasped, pointing to a cabinet in the kitchen. "And whiskey. Priorities," I muttered. I ran to the kitchen. I found the kit, another military-grade box, and a bottle of bourbon. I grabbed a glass, filled it, and brought everything back to the living room. "Drink," I said, pressing the glass to his lips. He took a large swallow, coughing as the alcohol hit his throat. Color returned faintly to his cheeks. "The heater. Switch is by the fireplace." I flipped the switch. The hum of an electric furnace kicked on, followed by the hiss of the gas fireplace igniting. Slowly, the room began to thaw. "I need to look at the wound," I said, kneeling beside him. "The vest might have caught the bullet, but the impact, the vest didn't catch it," he admitted, his eyes closing. "I wasn't wearing it when the sniper fired the first shot. I put it on after." My stomach turned. I grabbed the shears from the first aid kit and cut through his ruined shirt. The sight made me hiss in sympathy. The stitches I had placed earlier were torn, the wound gaping and angry, oozing fresh blood. But it was the bruising that looked worse. A massive purple and black hematoma spreading across his ribs where he had tackled me to the floor of the container. "You tore everything open," I said, my voice trembling. "I have to clean this again, and I have to stitch it again. And we don't have lidocaine this time." Silvio opened his eyes. They were dark, unfocused, but fixed on me. "Do it. I trust you." "You shouldn't," I whispered, soaking a piece of gauze in bourbon. "I restore painting, Silvio. I don't patch up mob bosses. You're doing a hell of a job so far." He gritted out. I worked in silence. The only sounds in the cabin were the crackling of the fire and Silvio's sharp intakes of breath as I cleaned the wound. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the tension in his muscles as he fought to stay still. It was intimate in a way that terrified me. I was touching him, hurting him to heal him, my hands covered in his blood. When I finished, bandaging him tightly with fresh gauze, I sat back on my heels, wiping my forehead with the back of my arm. I was exhausted. My green dress was destroyed, ripped at the hem and stained with grease and blood. My hair was a disaster. I must have looked like a nightmare, but when I looked at Silvio, he wasn't looking at the bandage. He was looking at me. "You saved the book," he said softly, nodding toward the coffee table where I had placed the leather journal. "I saved us," I corrected. "The book was just a bonus. Read it," he said. "We need to know." I reached for the journal. The leather was cold and cracked with age. I opened it to the bookmark I had hastily inserted back in the container. "It's a ledger of unauthorized payments," I said, scanning the page. "Your father. He didn't know about half of these. My dad marked them with a specific symbol, a double cross." "Who authorized them?" Silvio asked, his voice tight. I traced the column down to the signature at the bottom of the page. It wasn't a name. It was an initial. E. "E," I read aloud. "Who is E?" Silvio went still. Deadly still. Read the date. October 4th, 2004, I said. And again in November. And December. Large transfers to a holding company in Dublin, the O'Sullivan territory. Silvio closed his eyes. A look of pure, unadulterated pain crossed his face, shattering the stoic mask he wore so well. "Ettore," he whispered. "Who is Ettore?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. "Ettore Vitale," Silvio said, opening his eyes. They were wet. "My consigliere, my uncle. Not by blood, but he raised me after my father died. He taught me how to shoot. He taught me how to lead. He was the one who told me your father was the thief. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. The man Silvio trusted most in the world, the man who stood at his right hand, was the architect of his family's destruction. He's been working with the Irish for 20 years, I realized, the horror of it sinking in. He didn't just sell you out, Silvio. He's been bleeding your family dry since you were a child. The fake paintings, the North Cargo terminal. He set it all up. No, Silvio said, shaking his head. It's a mistake. Ettore would die for me. The numbers don't lie, I snapped, slamming the book shut. My father went to prison because of him. My life was destroyed because of him. And now he's trying to kill you. Who do you think told the O'Sullivans we were at the terminal? Who knew you were going there? Only Marco knew, Silvio defended weakly. And who controls Marco? I countered. You said it yourself. Marco is weak. Ettore manipulates him. He used Marco to get to you. Silvio tried to sit up, anger flaring in his eyes. You don't know him. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that he tried to kill us tonight, I shouted, standing up. The stress, the fear, the exhaustion, it all boiled over. I know that I just pulled a bullet fragment out of your side. I know that if we hadn't escaped, we would be dead in a metal box right now. Wake up, Silvio. The monster isn't under the bed. He's sitting at your dinner table. Silvio glared at me, his chest heaving. For a second, I thought he might strike me. The violence in him was close to the surface, raw and uncontrolled. But then the anger broke. He slumped back against the cushions, looking suddenly small, defeated. He was my father, Silvio whispered, in every way that mattered. My anger evaporated, replaced by a sharp pang of empathy. I knelt beside him again, softening my voice. I know, I said, reaching out to touch his hand. I know it hurts. My father was innocent, and I lost him. Your father figure is guilty, and you're losing him too. We're both orphans now, Silvio. He looked at my hand covering his. He turned his palm up, lacing his fingers with mine. His grip was desperate. I have nothing left, he said hoarsely. If Ettore is the traitor, then I have no family, no empire. It's all rot. You have the truth, I said fiercely. And you have me. The words slipped out before I could check them. I froze. Silvio looked at me, his eyes searching my face. The firelight cast dancing shadows across his sharp cheekbones. The pain in his expression slowly shifted into something else. Something hotter, darker. You, he repeated. The archivist who dropped shipping containers on armies. I improvise, I whispered. You stayed, he said, as if it was a miracle. You could have run in the parking lot. You could have left me in the car. You stayed. I don't leave things unfinished, I said, my breath catching as he pulled on my hand, drawing me closer. Come here, he murmured. Silvio, your wound. I don't care about the wound, he growled. He pulled me down until I was straddling his hips, mindful of his injury but needing to be close. The contact was electric. After hours of cold rain and cold steel, the heat of his body was overwhelming. His hands came up to cup my face. His thumbs traced my cheekbones, wiping away a smear of dirt. You are a mess, he whispered, a small, crooked smile touching his lips. You're not exactly cover model material right now either, I shot back. Make me forget, he said, his voice dropping to a plea. Make me forget that the man I loved like a father wants me dead. Make me forget the war, just for tonight. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the consequences or the future. We were two survivors in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, with an army hunting us. Tomorrow didn't exist. I leaned down and kissed him. This time it wasn't violent. It was slow, deep, and aching with need. It was a claiming. I felt his hands slide into my tangled hair, holding me like I was the only solid thing in a world that was crumbling away. We moved together with a desperate urgency, shedding the ruined clothes, shedding the titles of boss and archivist. In the firelight, scars were traced, bruises were kissed, and promises were made without a single word being spoken. It wasn't just passion. It was grief and rage and survival all tangled together. I fell asleep hours later, curled against his uninjured side, his arm draped protectively over me, the heavy beat of his heart against my ear, the only lullaby I needed. I woke to the sound of a rotor blade slicing the air. Light was streaming through the cracks in the heavy curtains. Dust motes danced in the beams. For a second, I felt safe, warm. Silvio was still asleep beside me, his face relaxed in slumber, looking younger than I had ever seen him. Then the sound registered. Thwop, thwop, thwop. A helicopter. I sat up, my heart leaping into my throat. I shook Silvio's shoulder. "Silvio, wake up." He was awake instantly, his hand going for the gun on the floor before his eyes were even fully open. "What is it?" he snapped, wincing as he sat up. "Listen," I said. The sound was loud, directly overhead. The wind from the rotors was shaking the window panes. "Reinforcements," Silvio said, a look of relief washing over his face. "I activated the emergency beacon on the SUV before we came inside. It must be my extraction team." He stood up, grabbing his pants and pulling them on with a grimace. "We're safe, Chloe. We're going home." I scrambled out of bed, wrapping the heavy wool blanket around myself. I walked to the window and peered through the crack in the curtain. A sleek black helicopter was descending into the clearing in front of the cabin. It kicked up a storm of snow and dead leaves. "It's a civilian chopper," I said, narrowing my eyes. "No markings." "It's the corporate transport," Silvio explained, pulling on his ruined shirt. "It's Ettore. He monitors the emergency frequencies. He must have realized I was in trouble and come himself." My blood ran cold. "Ettore." "Silvio, stop," I said, turning to him. He was checking his gun, preparing to go out. "What? We have to go. He'll take us to the main compound. We can regroup." "You can't go out there," I said, my voice rising. "You didn't read the rest of the journal." "We talked about this," he said impatiently. "We'll deal with the accusations later. Right now, we need extraction." "Look at the pilots," I shouted, pointing at the window. Silvio froze. He walked to the window and looked out. The helicopter had touched down. The side door opened. 2 men jumped out. They were wearing tactical gear. "They're wearing Giardoni colors," Silvio said. "See? Black and gray." "Look at their boots," I said, my archivist eyes picking up the detail that didn't belong. "Standard issue Giardoni Security wears Italian leather combat boots. Those men are wearing jungle boots with canvas sides. And look at the insignia on the pilot's helmet. It's not a wolf. It's a clover." Silvio squinted. He saw it. A tiny green clover painted on the side of the pilot's helmet. The Irish. "It's a trap," Silvio whispered, the color draining from his face. "He didn't come to save me. He came to finish the job," I said. We watched as a third figure stepped out of the helicopter. An older man, elegant in a cashmere coat, using a cane. He looked like a grandfather. He looked kind. It was the man I had seen in photos in the family albums, Ettore Vitale. He didn't look worried. He looked around the clearing, then gestured to the men. They raised their rifles and began to approach the cabin. They weren't moving like a rescue team. They were moving like a firing squad. "He thinks we're helpless," Silvio said, his voice dropping to a tone so cold it froze the air in the room. The grief was gone. The heartbreak was gone. All that was left was the ice. "He thinks you're dead or dying," I added. "He doesn't know we have the journal. He's not leaving this forest," Silvio said. He turned to me. "Can you shoot?" "I'm an archivist," I reminded him, clutching the blanket. "Today," Silvio said, racking the slide of his pistol. "You are a soldier. Put your clothes on, Chloe. We have a family reunion to attend." He handed me the spare magazine for his gun. "Do not aim for the chest," he instructed, his eyes dead. "They are wearing body armor. Aim for the pelvis or the head." I looked at the magazine, cold and heavy in my hand. Then I looked at the man who was preparing to kill the only father he had left. "Aim for the head," I repeated. I dropped the blanket and reached for my ruined dress. The rescue had arrived, and it was going to be a massacre. The transition from lovers to soldiers was brutal and immediate. One moment, we were tangled in the warmth of the bed, shielded by the illusion of safety. The next, We were standing in the center of the cold room, pulling on clothes that were stiff with dried mud and blood. I fastened the zipper of my ruined green dress, the sound loud in the silence. It felt like zipping myself into a body bag. Silvio moved with a terrifying calm. He checked the chamber of his pistol, then tucked it into the waistband of his trousers, covering it with the tattered remains of his dress shirt. He winced as the fabric brushed against his fresh bandages, but his face remained a mask of stone. He wasn't the man who had held me through the night. He was the Don of the Giardoni family, preparing to meet his executioner. "There is a maintenance log on the shelf behind you," I whispered, my eyes fixed on the window where the helicopter rotors were still churning up the snow outside. Leather-bound, similar size to my father's journal. Silvio didn't look at me, but he paused. "Why?" "Because if we walk out there empty-handed, they kill us both immediately," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to steady it. "Ettore wants the evidence. If he thinks I have it, I become a commodity. If he thinks you have it, you become a liability. I am not trading you for a book, Chloe. You aren't trading me," I said, grabbing the old maintenance log from the dusty shelf. It was heavy, smelling of mildew. I quickly shoved my father's real journal, the one that proved everything, under the cushion of the sofa, deep into the lining. "I'm creating a distraction. You said aim for the head. I'm aiming for his greed. Chloe, they are at the door," I hissed. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel porch. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the cabin. "Silvio, it's Ettore. Open up, son. We need to get you to the infirmary." The voice was warm, filled with the fatherly concern that had likely manipulated Silvio for his entire life. It made my skin crawl. Silvio looked at the door, then at me. A silent communication passed between us. A promise of violence, a plea for survival. He walked to the door and unlocked it. Ettore Vitale stood on the threshold, leaning on his cane. He was impeccable in a cashmere coat and a silk scarf, a stark contrast to the gritty reality of the forest. Flanking him were two men with assault rifles, their fingers resting casually near the triggers. "My God," Ettore said, his eyes widening as he took in Silvio's bloodied appearance. "You look like you went 12 rounds with a reaper, Silvio. I was terrified when the beacon went off." He stepped inside, his gaze flicking briefly to me. There was no warmth in that look. It was the way one looks at a stain on an expensive rug. "Who is this?" Ettore asked, gesturing to me with a gloved hand. "The act," Silvio rasped, leaning against the door frame as if he could barely stand. He played up the injury, letting his shoulders slump. "This is the girl, the one from the museum. She helped me." "Helped you?" Ettore raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling it?" "I saved his life," I interjected, stepping forward. I hugged the fake maintenance log to my chest, letting my eyes dart nervously between the gunmen. "And I expect to be paid for it." This wasn't part of the deal. Ettore's interest piqued. He looked at the book in my arms. "And what is that you're holding, my dear?" "Insurance," I said, backing away until my legs hit the sofa. "Silvio said if I got this to you, I'd get $100,000 and a plane ticket. I'm done. I want out." Silvio turned his head slowly to look at me, feigning shock. "Chloe?" "Shut up," I snapped at him, channeling every ounce of fear and exhaustion into the performance. "You dragged me into a shipping container. You almost got me shot. I don't care about your family feud. I just want my money." Ettore smiled. It was a slow, reptilian stretching of his lips. "A pragmatist. I admire that. You have the ledger from the terminal?" "I have the book," I corrected. "Money first. We can discuss finances on the way to the estate," Ettore said smoothly. He gestured to the door. "The helicopter is waiting. Unless you prefer to stay here and wait for the O'Sullivans to circle back." It was a threat wrapped in an invitation. "We go," Silvio said, pushing himself off the doorframe. He stumbled, and one of the guards moved to catch him. Silvio flinched away. "I can walk." We marched out into the freezing wind. The helicopter waited like a dark beast in the clearing. As I climbed into the back, I saw the pilot turn his head. The green clover on his helmet was unmistakable. I caught Silvio's eye. He had seen it too. He knew. The flight was short and suffocating. The noise of the rotors made conversation impossible, which was a mercy. I sat clutching the decoy book, my knuckles white. Silvio sat across from me, his head leaning back against the seat, eyes closed. But I saw the tension in his jaw. He was calculating the odds. He knew that the moment we landed, the pretense would drop. I looked down at the sprawling estate of the Giardoni family as it came into view. It was a fortress of limestone and manicured gardens, surrounded by high walls. From the air, it looked majestic. From the ground, it was going to be a slaughterhouse. The helicopter touched down on the private pad behind the main house. The wind whipped my hair across my face as the door slid open. We weren't greeted by medical staff. We were greeted by 6 more men, all heavily armed, forming a semicircle around the landing zone. And standing right behind them, looking nervous and pale, was Marco. Silvio stepped out first, favoring his injured side. I followed, clutching the book. "Marco!" Silvio shouted over the dying whine of the engine. "Where is the security detail? Why are these men here?" Marco didn't answer. He looked at Ettore, who was descending the steps of the chopper, with the grace of a king returning to his court. "The security detail has been relieved," Ettore announced, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence as the rotors slowed. "They were inefficient." Silvio turned to face his uncle. "Inefficient or loyal?" Ettore sighed, a sound of deep disappointment. He leaned on his cane, looking at Silvio with pity. "Loyalty is a fluid concept, Silvio. It flows to where the power lies. And right now, you are bleeding, exhausted, and compromised by a woman who is the daughter of a rat." He pointed his cane at me. "Give me the book, my dear, and perhaps you will live long enough to spend that money." This was it, the pivot point. If Silvio fought now, he died. He was outgunned 8-1, injured and exposed. But if I could shift the focus, I stepped away from Silvio. I moved toward Ettore, holding the book out like an offering. "I don't know him," I said, my voice rising in a pitch of hysterical panic. "I don't know anything about rats or loyalty. I found the book in the container because I know how to read the codes. He didn't find it. I did." "Chloe!" Silvio roared, a sound of genuine betrayal that I prayed he was faking. He lunged for me, but 2 guards slammed the butts of their rifles into his chest, knocking him to the pavement. He hit the ground hard, groaning as his wound surely tore further. "Stop it," I screamed, flinching. "He's crazy. He dragged me through the woods. Just take the damn book and let me go." I thrust the maintenance log into Ettore's hands. He took it. His fingers caressed the leather cover. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You see, Silvio?" Ettore said softly, looking down at his nephew sprawled on the asphalt. "This is the weakness of your generation. You rely on outsiders. You trust the wrong people." "She's lying!" Silvio spat, blood coating his teeth. "She's worthless. The book is encrypted. You can't read it without the cipher." "I have the cipher," I lied quickly, desperate to keep the value attached to me, not the book. "I have it in my head, the dates, the shipping weights. I know all of it. If you kill me, you just have a book of numbers you can't use." Ettore paused. He looked from the book to me. He was weighing the risk. "Is that so?" he mused. "Yes," I said, my breath coming in short gasps. "The key changes every hour. I'm the only one who can unlock the accounts. You need me. Then we have a new arrangement," Ettore decided. He snapped his fingers. 2 guards grabbed my arms, hauling me back. "Take her to the secure wing," Ettore ordered. "Put her in the holding cell. We will extract the cipher from her once we have secured the perimeter." "What about him?" Marco asked, stepping forward, his voice trembling. He pointed at his brother on the ground. Ettore looked at Silvio with a mixture of affection and contempt. "He is no threat," Ettore said dismissively. "Look at him, broken, betrayed by his own whore, bleeding out on the pavement. Lock him in his study. Let him watch as we dismantle his empire. I want him to sign the transfer papers before he dies." "No!" Silvio shouted, struggling to rise. "Ettore, You traitorous son of a bitch! Take her! Ettore commanded. The guards dragged me away. I didn't fight them. I let them pull me backward toward the house. I watched Silvio. He was on his knees, held down by two men. He was looking at me. His face was a mask of rage, screaming curses at me, calling me a traitor, a thief, a liar. But for a split second, just before they dragged me around the corner of the mansion, his eyes locked with mine. He blinked. Once. Slow and deliberate. It was the signal. I see you. He knew the book was fake. He knew I had the real one hidden in the cabin. He knew I had just sold myself into captivity to buy him time. You'll regret this, I screamed back at him, playing my part to the bitter end. I hope they kill you. Get her out of my sight, Ettore said, turning his back on Silvio to follow me. I was hauled through the service entrance of the mansion. The grip of the guards was bruising, their fingers digging into my arms. I was terrified. I was walking into a torture chamber. I had handed over a meaningless maintenance log to a man who would kill me the moment he realized it wasn't the ledger. But as the heavy steel door of the holding cell slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness, I didn't cry. I slid down the wall to the cold floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I had bought him time. Silvio Giardoni was alive. He was inside the house, and Ettore had just made the fatal mistake of leaving a wolf alive because he thought he had pulled its teeth. I closed my eyes and waited for the sound of the war to begin. It wouldn't be long now. Silvio wouldn't stay in that study. And when he came for me, he wouldn't be bringing a maintenance log. He would be bringing hell. I touched the empty space where the earpiece had been. We were disconnected. Alone. But as I sat in the dark, I replayed that single blink over and over in my mind. Trust me, he had said in the alley. Trust me, I had said on the helipad. Now, we would see which of us could survive the truth. The darkness of the holding cell was absolute. A heavy, suffocating blanket that smelled of damp concrete and old fear. It was the kind of darkness that messed with your equilibrium, making it impossible to tell where the walls ended and the void began. I sat on the floor, my back pressed against the cold stone, counting my own heartbeats to measure the passing of time. 1, 2, 3. I had been down here for what felt like hours, but was likely only 40 minutes. My mind, usually disciplined by the rigorous categorization of archives, was threatening to fracture. I replayed the look in Silvio's eyes before the guards had dragged me away. The blink. The signal. He knew. But knowing the truth and surviving it were two very different things. The sound of the heavy steel lock disengaging echoed like a gunshot in the silence. I scrambled to my feet, pressing my spine against the furthest wall. The door swung open, spilling harsh yellow light into the cell. It blinded me for a second, forcing me to shield my eyes. A man stepped inside. He wasn't one of the Giardoni guards. He was huge, built like a vending machine, with pale skin and a beard that did nothing to hide the cruelty of his mouth. He wore the tactical gear of the mercenaries I had seen at the terminal. An O'Sullivan lieutenant. He dragged a metal chair into the room, the legs screeching against the concrete, and placed it in the center of the cell. He didn't sit. He stood behind it, gripping the backrest until his knuckles turned white. "The uncle is unhappy," the man said. His voice was a low rumble, thick with a South Boston accent. "He says the book is nonsense. He says the numbers don't match the accounts." "It's encrypted," I said, my voice shaking. I forced myself to stand tall, despite the trembling in my knees. I told him that. "You can't just read it. You need the key. And you have the key," he stated, stepping around the chair. "In my head," I lied. "But I need a computer. I need to see the current title charts to calculate the variance. I can't do it in a dungeon." The man laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You think you're smart, don't you? The little art girl. You think you can talk your way out of a bullet." He closed the distance between us in 2 strides. He grabbed my hair, yanking my head back. I gasped, tears springing to my eyes as the scalp burned. He forced my face up toward the light. "My name is Killian," he whispered, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. "And I don't need a computer to get codes. I find that pain is a universal language. It translates everything. If you hurt me. I choked out, gripping his wrist with my hands, trying to alleviate the pressure. You lose the money. The key changes in 20 minutes. If I don't input the sequence, the accounts lock permanently. The money disappears. It was complete gibberish. Technobabble I had made up on the spot. But Killian was a muscle, not a banker. He hesitated. Let go of her, Killian. The voice came from the intercom speaker mounted in the corner of the ceiling. It was Ettore Vitale. Even distorted by the static, his voice sounded elegant, composed, and terrifying. Killian shoved me back against the wall. I hit my head on the stone, stars bursting in my vision, but I stayed on my feet. She's stalling, Mr. Vitale. Killian shouted at the ceiling. Let me work on her. 5 minutes. I'll get you the sequence. Bring her upstairs, Ettore commanded. To the library. I want her to input this code in front of me, and if it doesn't work, well, then you can have your 5 minutes. Killian grinned. He pulled a handgun from his holster and pointed it at my stomach. Move, and don't trip. I have an itchy trigger finger. I walked out of the cell, my legs feeling like lead. The hallway outside was deserted. The usual Giardoni guards replaced by O'Sullivan mercenaries patrolling in pairs. This wasn't a transition of power. It was an occupation. We reached the service elevator. Killian shoved me inside and punched the button for the main floor. You picked the wrong boyfriend, sweetheart. He sneered as the elevator rose. Silvio Giardoni is a corpse walking. You should have taken the payout when you had the chance. I don't date criminals, I muttered, looking at the floor numbers climbing. I just work for them. The doors opened. The main hallway of the estate was chaos. Servants were being herded into the kitchen by armed men. Paintings, real paintings, unlike the fake Raphael, were being pulled off the walls. Ettore wasn't just taking over. He was liquidating the assets immediately. Killian marched me toward the double mahogany doors of the library. Move it! He prodded me with the gun barrel. We entered the library. It was a magnificent room, 2 stories high, lined with rare books and smelling of leather and cigar smoke. Ettore sat behind the massive oak desk that had belonged to Silvio's father. He looked right at home. Marco was there too, standing by the window, looking pale and sick. He held a glass of whiskey that was shaking so hard the liquid was sloshing over the rim. Ah, the archivist, Ettore said, looking up from the fake maintenance log. He didn't look happy. I have been trying to apply your so-called title algorithm to these pages. It produces nothing but gibberish. I told you, I said, stepping further into the room, Killian close behind me. I need the real-time data. Give me a laptop. Ettore studied me. His eyes were cold, calculating beads of obsidian. He tapped his finger against the leather cover of the book. I think, Ettore said slowly, that there is no code. I think this is a book of maintenance schedules for the HVAC system of a warehouse in Jersey. I think you are lying to buy time. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'm not, Killian, Ettore said softly. Shoot her in the leg. Let's see if that refreshes her memory. No, I screamed, backing up. Killian raised the gun, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He aimed for my left kneecap. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the shattering pain. Click. The sound was loud in the room, but there was no explosion, no pain. Killian frowned, looking down at his weapon. He racked the slide. A bullet ejected, bouncing on the Persian rug. He aimed again. Click. What the hell? Killian muttered. Your firing pin has been filed down, a voice said from the shadows of the upper mezzanine balcony. Every head in the room snapped upward. Silvio Giardoni stood at the railing of the second floor. He looked like a demon dragged straight from hell. His white shirt was gone. Replaced by a dark tactical sweater he must have scavenged from a guard. His bandages were soaked through with fresh blood. But he stood straight, his gun resting casually on the railing, aimed directly at Ettore's head. Silvio, Ettore whispered, his face losing its composure for the first time. How? You locked me in my study, Silvio said, his voice a low, rough growl that vibrated through the room. The study that I built. The study that has a panic panel behind the wainscoting connecting to the armory. Did you really think I didn't have a way out of my own house, Uncle? Kill him, Ettore screamed, diving behind the heavy oak desk. Killian spun around, raising his useless gun, then realized his mistake and reached for the knife on his belt. He never got the chance. Silvio didn't fire. He didn't have to. From the hallway behind us, 3 loud suppressed shots puffed, thwip, thwip, thwip. Killian's chest erupted in red. He stared at me, eyes wide with shock, and crumbled to the floor, dead before he hit the rug. I spun around. Marco stood in the doorway. He was holding a smoking pistol with a silencer. His face was white as a sheet, tears streaming down his cheeks. But his aim had been true. "I'm sorry," Marco sobbed, looking up at his brother on the balcony. "I didn't know, Silvio. I swear to God, I didn't know he was with the Irish. I thought he was just saving the family from bankruptcy." "Pick a side, Marco," Silvio barked, vaulting over the railing. He landed heavily on the ground floor, rolling to absorb the impact to protect his injured side, and came up in a crouch next to me. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, scanning me for injuries, ignoring the dead mercenary at our feet. "I'm fine," I gasped, reaching out to steady him. He was burning up with fever, but his eyes were clear. "You filed the firing pin?" "I accessed the armory logs while I was locked up," Silvio said, grimacing as he stood. "I disabled every weapon assigned to the O'Sullivan team electronically before they even breached the house. Smart guns are useful until the admin turns them off." "Clever," I breathed. "Get down!" Silvio shoved me behind a heavy leather armchair. Ettore popped up from behind the desk. He wasn't unarmed. He was holding a vintage revolver, an old mechanical piece that didn't rely on electronic firing pins. "You ungrateful brat!" Ettore shouted, firing wild. The bullet shattered a vase near my head, showering me with porcelain shards. "Marco!" Ettore yelled. "Kill him! He's ruining everything! We had a deal with the commission, peace, wealth!" Marco stood in the doorway, the gun shaking in his hand. He looked from his uncle, the man who had raised them, to his brother, the man who had protected him. "You sold us out, Ettore," Marco whispered. "You killed our father's reputation. You tried to kill Silvio." "I did it for the family," Ettore roared, firing again. This time the bullet hit Silvio in the shoulder, his good shoulder. Silvio grunted, stumbling back, but he didn't fall. He raised his own weapon. "You did it for yourself," Silvio said calmly. He squeezed the trigger. The shot hit Ettore in the hand holding the revolver. The vintage gun went flying. Ettore screamed, clutching his mangled hand, and collapsed back into the chair. "Secure him," Silvio ordered. Marco moved. He rushed forward, kicking the revolver away and pressing the barrel of his gun to Ettore's temple. "Don't move," Marco spat, his voice cracking. "Don't you dare move." Silvio slumped against the bookcase, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the damage to his body was catching up. "Silvio!" I ran to him, tearing the hem of my dress to make a compress. I pressed it against his shoulder. "You need a hospital. Now. No more tough guy acts." "The house." Silvio wheezed, his eyes fluttering. "Is it clear?" "I don't know," I said, applying pressure. "Killian is dead. Ettore is secured. But there are still mercenaries outside." "No," Marco said from the desk. He was looking at Ettore's phone, which was lying on the blotter. He sent the recall code. When the smart guns jammed, the mercenaries pulled back. They thought it was a setup by the Giardoni. They fled. "Cowards," Silvio muttered. He looked at me, his hand coming up to touch my face. His fingers were bloody, but his touch was gentle. You walked into the lion's den with a book of HVAC schedules." "I'm an archivist," I said, a tear finally escaping and tracking through the dirt on my cheek. "We know how to bluff with paperwork." "You're crazy," he whispered, a smile touching his lips. "Absolutely crazy." "Look who's talking," I said, trying to laugh but choking on a sob. "You jumped off a balcony." "I calculated the drop," he defended weakly. "Silvio." Marco's voice cut through the moment. He was standing over Ettore, who was moaning in pain. "What do we do with him?" The room went silent. The weight of 20 years of betrayal hung heavy in the air. This was the man who had sat at their Sunday dinners. The man who had comforted them at their parents' funerals. The man who had framed my father. Silvio struggled to stand. I tried to help him, but he pushed me gently aside. "I need to do this," he said. He walked over to the desk, limping heavily. He stood over Ettore. Ettore looked up, his face gray with shock and pain. "Silvio, listen to me. The O'Sullivans. They were going to crush us. I made a deal to save the legacy. I did it for you. You did it to rule," Silvio corrected. "You framed Arthur Mitchell. You let an innocent man rot in prison for 2 decades to cover your theft." "He was a nobody," Ettore spat. "An accountant. He was expendable." "Nobody is expendable," Silvio said. He picked up the fake maintenance log from the desk. He held it up. "This book? It's worthless. But the one in the cabin, the one Chloe saved, that one has your signature on every page." "Silvio, please," Ettore begged, realizing that the end had come. "I am your blood." "No," Silvio said. He turned to Marco. "Get the car. We are taking him to the authorities." "The authorities?" Marco blinked, confused. We don't do police, Silvio. We handle this in-house." "Not this time," Silvio said, looking at me. "Arthur Mitchell is in a federal prison. The only way to get him out is with a confession and evidence delivered to the FBI. Ettore is going to rot in the same cell he put her father in. That is his punishment. Death is too easy." I stared at Silvio. In the world of the MAFIA, rats were killed. Snitches were buried. But he was choosing a different path. He was choosing justice over revenge. "For me. Thank you," I whispered. Silvio nodded, his eyes weary but warm. "Go get the car, Marco. And call the medic. I think I'm finally done bleeding." Marco nodded, wiping his eyes, and ran out of the room. Silvio leaned against the desk, his strength failing. I moved to his side, wrapping my arm around his waist to support him. "You didn't have to do that," I said softly. "You could have killed him. I wanted to," Silvio admitted. "But killing him doesn't give you your father back. And today is about restoration." He looked at the ruined library, the shattered glass, the dead body on the floor. "We have a lot of work to do," he murmured. "We?" I asked. He looked down at me, and despite the blood, the dirt, and the chaos, the connection between us was the strongest thing in the room. "You're the archivist," he said. "I'm going to need someone to organize the new empire, one without secrets, without lies." "I'm expensive," I warned him. "I know." Silvio kissed the top of my head. "I suspect you're going to cost me everything I have. And I suspect you're worth every penny." We stood there in the wreckage of his past, holding each other up. The storm had passed. The traitor was broken. And for the first time in 24 hours, the future didn't look like a dark alley or a shipping container. It looked like something we could build. But as the sirens began to wail in the distance, real federal cars this time, answering Marco's call to Silvio's contact, called by Marco, I knew the hardest part was just beginning. We had won the war. Now we had to survive the peace. "Don't let go," Silvio whispered, as his knees buckled slightly. "I've got you," I said, holding him tighter. "I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. I wasn't just the date for his brother's wedding anymore. I was the woman who had walked through fire with him, and I was staying right here until the ashes cooled. The invitation was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind that whispered wealth before you even read the text. The gold leaf embossing caught the light of the vanity mirror as I picked it up for the 100th time. The Giardoni Foundation invites you to the inauguration of the Arthur Mitchell Wing for Renaissance Conservation. 8 months. That was how long it had taken to scrub the blood out of the cracks in the Giardoni empire and replace it with something that looked like legitimacy. 8 months since the night in the forest, since the helicopter, since the moment I walked into a holding cell and bought Silvio's life with a lie. Mr. Henderson's name had been folded into the list of casualties. A quiet footnote the Foundation tried to forget, but that lived carved into the back of my ribs. I set the card down and looked at my reflection. The woman staring back at me wasn't the terrified archivist who had hidden in a basement lab. She was sharper, colder, and infinitely more expensive. My hair was swept up in a chignon that defied gravity, secured with diamond pins that had belonged to Silvio's grandmother. And the dress. Silvio had sent it this morning. It wasn't green. Green was the color of survival, of the frantic flight through the woods. This dress was gold. Liquid metallic gold that clung to my body like a second skin, turning me into a living statue, a piece of art restored with precious metal. It was a statement. Kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer, making the cracks part of the history rather than hiding them. "You look like a queen," a voice said from the doorway. I turned. My father stood there. He looked older than I remembered from the visits behind the plexiglass. Prison had taken the color from his hair and the spring from his step, but his eyes were clear. He was wearing a tuxedo that Silvio's tailor had cut to hide the frailty of his frame. He was free. Ettore Vitale was currently awaiting trial in a maximum security federal facility, his plea deal rejected thanks to the mountain of evidence we had provided. My father was exonerated. The DOJ had called it a rare correction in a system built to grind men like him into dust, crediting an anonymous federal witness and the ledgers ripped out of Ettore Vitale's empire. "I look like a trophy," I corrected gently, walking over to straighten his bow tie. "But tonight, I'm a trophy with teeth. You saved me, Chloe," he whispered, his hands trembling as he held my shoulders. "I sat in that cell for 20 years waiting to die, and you walked into the fire and pulled me out. I had help," I said, thinking of the scar on Silvio's side, the silver line of puckered skin that I traced with my fingertips every night. "Giardoni," my father said the name with a complicated mix of gratitude and lingering fear. "He is a dangerous man, Chloe. He is a predator. You know that, don't you? The art, the foundation, this gala, it's all just a frame. The picture inside hasn't changed." "I know what he is, Dad," I said, picking up my clutch. "I restored him. I know every layer of paint, every crack, every hidden signature. He's dangerous, yes, but he's mine." A knock at the suite door interrupted us. It was Marco. The younger Giardoni brother had changed too. The nervous, sweaty boy who had held a gun on his uncle was gone. In his place was a man who carried his guilt like a penance. He was leaner, quieter, and he followed orders with a terrifying efficiency. "The car is ready," Marco said, nodding respectfully to my father. "Silvio is already at the gallery. He wanted to handle the security suite personally." "Thank you, Marco," I said. We took the elevator down to the lobby of the penthouse. The Maybach waited. Not the one we had destroyed fleeing the terminal. That car had been crushed into a cube of scrap metal, but a new one, pristine and armored. Vermeer had been left upstairs, already claiming the back of one of Silvio's velvet sofas as his throne, a stubborn scrap of the life that had existed before basements and guns. The drive to the Chicago Art Institute was smooth. The city glided past, a blur of lights. I remembered the ride in the rain 8 months ago, huddled in the corner, terrified. Now I sat in the center of the seat, watching the city I helped conquer. When we arrived, the paparazzi were a wall of flashing lights. But this time, I didn't flinch. I stepped out of the car, the gold dress blazing under the camera flashes, and offered my hand to my father to help him out. "Chin up, Dad," I murmured. "Let them see you." We walked up the grand staircase. The crowd parted for us. These were the same people who had whispered, "traitor" and "thief" at the wedding. Now they smiled and bowed. They knew the wind had shifted. They knew that the Mitchell name was now backed by Giardoni steel. Silvio was waiting at the top of the stairs. He was talking to the mayor, but his eyes were locked on the entrance. When he saw me, he stopped mid-sentence. He ignored the politician, ignored the donors, and walked straight toward me. He was wearing a black tuxedo, classic and severe, but he had swapped the tie for a cravat of gold silk that matched my dress. A subtle claim, a branding. "Chloe," he said, his voice low and rough, vibrating through my chest. He took my hand, raising it to his lips, but his eyes never left mine. And Mr. Mitchell. Welcome, Mr. Giardoni, my father said stiffly. It was the first time they had met face to face since the release. Please, Silvio said, stepping aside to gesture to the grand hall. Tonight is about you, Arthur. It is a very small repayment for a very large debt. The wing is open. Go see your legacy. My father hesitated, then nodded and walked into the crowd, where curators and historians were waiting to fawn over him. I was left alone with the monster. You're late, Silvio murmured, pulling me against his side. His hand rested on the small of my back, his thumb tracing the line of my spine through the gold silk. I wanted to make an entrance, I replied, leaning into his touch. And you know I hate being early. You look, he paused, searching for the word, lethal. Gold suits you. It's harder than green. I felt like I needed armor, I admitted. Is everything secure? The perimeter is locked down, Silvio assured me, guiding me toward the champagne flutes, which, I noted, were being served by men I recognized from his personal guard, not hired catering staff. Marco handled the guest list. No surprises, no O'Sullivans, just fear and respect. Mostly fear, I noted, seeing the way a bank CEO spilled his drink when Silvio glanced in his direction. Fear keeps the peace, Silvio said simply. Come. There is something I want to show you. He didn't lead me to the new wing. He led me away from the party, past the velvet ropes, down a corridor that led to the private administrative offices. Where are we going? I asked, the noise of the gala fading behind us. To the archives, he said. We entered a climate-controlled room at the back of the museum. It was my old world, smelling of dust and solvent. But on the central table, there wasn't a painting. There was a briefcase, a sleek aluminum Halliburton case. Silvio let go of me and walked to the table. He rested his hands on the case, looking down at it for a long moment. We did it, he said quietly. Ettore is gone. The Irish have retreated back to Boston. The business is stable, legitimate mostly. Mostly, I echoed, walking around the table to face him. We still have the docks. We will always have the docks, Silvio conceded. But the trafficking is gone. The weapons are gone. We move cargo. We move influence. It's cleaner. He unlocked the case. Click, click. He opened the lid. Inside, sitting on the black foam, were two things. A thick stack of bearer bonds, untraceable cash, and a heavy iron key. What is this? I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. $5 million, Silvio said, his voice devoid of emotion. And the key to a safe deposit box in Zurich. The box contains passports, new names, clean histories, for you and your father. I stared at the contents, then looked up at him. Why are you giving me this? Because the war is over, Silvio said. He looked exhausted. Not physically, he had healed, but spiritually. I dragged you into this, Chloe. I kidnapped you from an alley. I forced you to lie, to steal, to almost die. I made you a soldier in a war that wasn't yours. I chose to fight, I said. Did you? He stepped closer, his eyes intense. Or did you just do what you had to do to survive me? You're a civilian, Chloe. You belong in the light. You belong with the art, not the people who steal it. He pushed the briefcase toward me. Take it, he said. Take your father, go to Europe, finish your degree, live a life where you don't have to check the firing pin of a gun before you enter a room. You're free. I'm releasing you. It was a noble gesture. It was the good guy move. It was the moment in the movie where the beast lets Beauty go because he loves her too much to keep her in the castle. I looked at the money. It was freedom. It was safety. It was everything I had wanted 8 months ago when I was scrubbing varnish off a canvas for minimum wage. I reached out and took the key. Silvio flinched, a microscopic tightening of his jaw. But he didn't stop me. He watched me hold the cold iron. Then, I turned and walked to the industrial shredder in the corner of the room, the one used for destroying confidential manifests. I dropped the key into the slot. The machine roared to life, gnashing the metal. It shrieked, groaned, and then spat out twisted, useless shards of iron. Silvio stared at me. His mask cracked. Shock, raw and unguarded, flooded his face. "Chloe," he breathed. I walked back to the table, slammed the briefcase shut, and pushed it off the edge. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. "You don't get to decide when I'm done, Silvio Giardoni," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You don't get to decide who I am. You think I'm still the girl in the alley? That girl died in the shipping container. She died the moment she looked Ettore Vitale in the eye and lied to save your life." I stepped into his space, grabbing the lapels of his tuxedo. "I don't want Zurich," I hissed. "I don't want safe. Safe is boring. Safe is a lie. I want the man who burns down cities for me. I want the partner who trusts me with the codes to his empire." Once, the idea of disappearing behind a new passport and a colorless little life in another country might have sounded like salvation. After basements and containers, and the look in Ettore's eyes when he realized I was the one closing the door, it sounded like a padded cell with softer sheets. I hadn't crawled out of that grave just to let someone else write my ending. "It's dangerous," Silvio argued, though his hands had already come up to grip my waist, pulling me closer as if he couldn't help himself. "It will never be clean. There will always be wolves at the door. Then let them come," I said. "We have better teeth." I reached up and unpinned the diamond clip from my hair, letting the red waves tumble down. "You said you needed someone to organize the empire. Someone without secrets. Are you firing me?" "I could never fire you," Silvio whispered, his forehead resting against mine. "You own the place. Then stop trying to send me away." He kissed me then. It wasn't the desperate kiss of the woods or the angry kiss of the highway. It was a seal, a contract signed in breath and desire. It was an acknowledgement that we were both broken, both jagged-edged, and that we fit together perfectly because of it. "I have something else," he murmured against my lips, pulling back slightly. He reached into his pocket. I expected a ring. I expected the diamond that would seal the deal in the eyes of the public. Instead, he pulled out a small, folded piece of canvas. It was the corner of the painting from the museum, the piece I had cut out, the piece with the Giardoni seal hidden in the ink. "I framed the rest of it," he said. "But I kept this. To remind me." "Remind you of what?" "That you saw what no one else could," he said. "You saw the truth underneath the varnish. You saw me." He pressed the scrap of canvas into my hand, closing my fingers over it. "Marry me," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand, a plea, a fact. Not for the cameras, not for the family, for us. Marry me and run this damn city with me until we burn it down or buy it all. I squeezed the canvas. It was rough, textured, real. "I have conditions," I said, echoing the words I had spoken in the alley so long ago. Silvio smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his dark eyes and lit them up. "I expect nothing less. My father runs the foundation without interference," I listed. "No money laundering through the Renaissance collection. Use the modern art wing. The paint is thicker, it hides more." Silvio laughed, a low, rough sound of delight. "Done." "What else?" "And I want the combination to the armory," I said, serious. "If I'm going to be the queen, I want my own gun." "You already have the combination," he whispered. "It's your birthday." I paused. "You changed the code to my birthday?" "I changed everything to you," he said. "The codes, the accounts, the deeds. If I die tomorrow, Chloe, you are the most powerful woman in Chicago." I made sure of it. My heart stuttered. He hadn't just given me a job. He had given me the keys to the kingdom. He had trusted me with his legacy. "Then we better go back out there," I said, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. "We have a wing to inaugurate, and I think Marco is terrified of making the speech alone." "Let him sweat," Silvio said, stealing one last kiss. "He needs the practice." He offered me his arm. "Ready, Mrs. Giardoni?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "It's Miss Mitchell, until I see the ring. I expect at least 5 carats, flawless clarity, emerald cut." 6, Silvio corrected, leading me toward the door. "And it's already on your finger." I looked down. In the heat of the moment, I hadn't felt him slip it on. A massive, rectangular diamond sat on my left hand, blazing under the harsh lights of the archive room. It was heavy. It was ostentatious. It was perfect. "You're arrogant," I said, shaking my head. "I'm prepared," he countered. We walked back down the hallway, toward the music and the applause and the flashing lights. I thought about the girl who cleaned paintings in the basement, afraid of her own shadow. She was gone. In her place was a woman who knew that some stains couldn't be removed. They had to be incorporated into the masterpiece. We reached the top of the stairs. The crowd looked up.